My name is James Crowell, and I'm the president of the Biloxi branch NAACP. I've been president for about 28 years here. I succeeded Dr. Gilbert Mason, who was the first president of our branch, and he was here for 33 years. So we've only had two presidents of Biloxi NAACP. Dr. Mason started the NAACP back in 1960. Initially, when he came down from Jackson, Mississippi, where his home, and he had gone to medical school, and he came down here to open a doctor's office. He was a member of the Gulfport NAACP, where Dr. Felix Dunn was the president. And so Dr. Mason saw the need for a chapter in Biloxi. And so he started the Biloxi chapter here in Biloxi. And we know later on, he did it for a reason, and that was to integrate the beaches here in Biloxi. He did the Biloxi beaches. Dr. Dunn did the Gulfport beaches. There was only one area of the beach that blacks were allowed to go on. And so Dr. Mason felt, and blacks here felt, that since taxes went to build that man-made beach here on the coast, about 28 to 30 miles of beaches, that every citizen should be entitled to use that beach. And so, of course, he went to court, and they won, and now we all can go and be a part of that beach. I also wanted to explain to you all about New Bethel Missionary Baptist Church. When the Head Start program came to Mississippi, in Biloxi, of course, the first Head Start was started at New Bethel Missionary Baptist Church. It was upstairs. They had most of our young people who needed pre-K type education attended Head Start. And it was very helpful to them when they attended school in the first grade that they were able to do a lot of the tasks that they were given because of that help they received in Head Start. And it was also ran by primarily most of the black people, and these kids were taught by the black people. So New Bethel Missionary Baptist Church was the first church to start Head Start here in Biloxi. And the people in Biloxi remembered that by naming a new Head Start Center that is built on Potts Ferry Road in D'Iberville after Dr. Gilbert Mason, a beautiful building. And it serves not only black kids, but it serves any kids that are in that age group. They can attend, and if their parents meet the amount of money, salary requirements that you must have in order to go. So by being a part of New Bethel's program, the NAACP, Dr. Mason, was rewarded by the Head Start in D'Iberville being named for him. Now, Miss Myrtle Davis, a good friend of mine that I met when I came down here, and she didn't bite her tongue, I want to tell you. She told you what was on her mind. But back in the days when they were waiting on the beach to integrate the beach, Dr. Mason was threatened many times. Several times they tried to put a bomb at his house and in his car. So they decided that he needed protection. And so they organized a group called BAM, Black Angry Men. But of course, Miss Myrtle Davis was not a man. She was a woman. And of course, she wanted to be a part of that group. And they couldn't refuse her because she told them, Dr. Mason is my president and nobody will hurt him. So she was the only female, I understand, that was a part of that BAM group. And of course, she did an excellent job in protecting Dr. Mason. And you know, his son was one of the first to integrate the schools, high schools here in Biloxi. So, of course, with all of that going on, he needed the protection of the BAMs, including Miss Myrtle Davis.
So my name's John Kemp, and I am a subscribing Silver Life member of the Biloxi NAACP. I'm also a lifelong East Biloxi resident, even though I've moved and lived all over the world, literally. But I still claim East Biloxi to my heart. I am also a board member of the STEPS Coalition, still associated with the wonderful East Biloxi Community Collaborative and other groups amongst that. And also, I am the proud member of a fourth generation Kemp, I should say, which is one of the biggest families in East Biloxi. So growing up in Biloxi was very special in the early 70s, particularly. Although I was born in the late 60s, I got a good, nice family upbringing throughout East Biloxi, particularly Main and Division Street. If you travel with me going south, actually going north toward the Bay, you would see the first business. You know, we worked hard here in East Biloxi, and so the grown people like to play hard. So when you come across the tracks, the first business you saw to your right was a place called the Little Apple. And so the Little Apple was a lounge where, you know, people would get off work, and I assume because I was a kid, people would go in there and probably have them an adult beverage and listen to music. And as you walk down the street, you would find out real quick that barbershops and beauticians were a mainstay also in and around the Main and Division Street. Mr. Haynes actually had a barbershop across from the Little Apple that would later close. And then the kingpin himself, Mr. Tyrone Burton, started. Mr. Tyrone actually had 4 locations on Main and Division in the last 60 years. August 29th was his 60th year that he graduated from barber school, is what he told me just recently. But his current location is his 4th location in those 60 years. But getting into the more prevalent things about East Biloxi, you have to talk about the places of worship, and you have to talk about our institutions of learning. Now, as far as places of worship are concerned, as far as I know, the oldest African-American place of worship in Biloxi is First Missionary Baptist Church, which I, as a young tot, attended one of their vacation Bible schools probably regularly because that was always something to do in Biloxi, was when school was out to go to one of the church's vacation Bible schools. At least 5 of them between, May and, time we went back to school after September, Labor Day weekend. The other church is, of course, Our Mother of Sorrows. That is the Catholic Church. And from what I understand, based on the research that I did, the school portion of Our Mother of Sorrows opened up in 1917, and it would close eventually in 1967. A good friend of mine, the Seymours and the Mitchells, and some other friends of mine actually had parents that went to that school. Although I grew up African Methodist, the Mitchells, their whole family just about went to the school and attended the church also. Good friend of mine, Bernard Seymour, attended the church regularly. Talked to him briefly about his experiences going to church. Told me something interesting, that they actually had early mass at 6:30 in the morning on Saturday, and then they would have another mass sometimes on Wednesday throughout the week. But of course, we spoke about the highlight of that Our Mother of Sorrows being the bazaar that they had once a year. And it was nothing greater than the bazaar. And it invited everybody from the community. And the bazaar to me back then was just like a big fair. Even though there were no rides, they had plenty of games, they had music. It was a great time to fellowship, and you can go inside, and there was always a older person on hand to give you a brief Bible lesson. Then you go back out there and eat your cotton candy and play until you got full and tired and went home. So Our Mother of Sorrows, again, one of the tenets of our community as far as, places of worship was concerned. Now, the other tenet of the community is, of course, education. And there's nothing like our Mecca, and that would be Nichols. Nichols High School, actually referred to affectionately as Nichols Colored High. Nichols was actually a pre-K through 12th grade program. All 12 grades in pre-K were, I'm sorry, not pre-K, but K through 12 was in Nichols. My mom, her siblings went to Nichols. I actually went to Nichols for a semester because even though we lived in the projects across the street from Nichols, because of the integration, we had to go out to Fernwood in junior high. And so that meant that we couldn't walk across the street to go to Nichols. We had to catch a bus and go 12, 13 miles across the city to actually almost another city called Gulfport, Fernwood Junior High. But Nichols was important because it was the foundation of education. It was the mecca, like I said, of everything that this city or this side of town had to offer as far as the African-American experience. Talking to older people that's still involved with the Nichols reunion, they've all told me that every teacher that they had at Nichols meant business. That means when you showed up to class, even if you were an athlete, a jock or whatever, and when that bell rang, it was about learning, getting your education, and going to compete in a very segregated world. So again, Nichols was the other cornerstone of the East Biloxi experience as far as, it was the only, at that time, the only one. Going in later, moving toward the late 70s, we had, of course, Duquesne Elementary and Garnflow. And as some of you may know, that there was a effort to close Nichols. And I'm fortunate to know some of those members of that committee that actually saved the school and had it reopened, because I think the city actually successfully closed it for a short time. And thanks to the leadership of people like James Caldwell and some other people that I'm fortunate to know, that national news story of that little committee that saved that school is why it's still open right now. Getting back to the Saving Our School Coalition. Saving Our School Coalition was the group that actually saved Nichols. And again, as I mentioned earlier, Nichols is the mecca of anything education in this community. If you were a child or a teenager, you went to that school. It was K through 12. And it was not just a building. That school, based on what I understand as a young toddler, the Nichols people, MF Nichols, that little group of educators were the top tier of educators. So if you had a chance, you were blessed to go to that school, you came out somebody. You came out with a full education. And again, the Saving Our School Coalition, the legal arm of that was the Mississippi Center for Justice. And they actually had to go to court to fight a wrong. That school was the top performing school in the system. and yet the city, the public school system wanted to close it. But thank God that fight was won. Now let me get to the fun part, the businesses of Main and Division. And I tell people this often, you really didn't have to leave the neighborhood. If you were to, again, walk with me from the railroad tracks going south, you're going to notice one thing, that the people in this community, they worked hard, but they played hard and they liked to party and they loved to dress nice. So as I got to be a teenager, one thing I learned, that I can go to the shrimp factory and work, get my little pay right then, take it to Brothers Grocery right there at the corner of Nixon and Division, cash my check right there, get me some hoghead cheese and some crackers and a soda, go get my hair cut, go down to Brothers John's men's shop, get me a new outfit, come back, get me a snack, maybe at one of the other grocery stores that were surrounding. Didn't have to leave the neighborhood. We were self-sufficient. But of course, I was a young tot, so I couldn't go into none of the nightlife yet. I'll get to that later, because at one point, the nightlife in Biloxi was the place to go when you came to Biloxi. If you were from Moss Point, Gulfport, Jackson County, the Tri-County area, you ended up on Main and Division Street on Fridays and Saturday night, mostly Friday nights, because that was the night normally a football game would take place. The football game between Biloxi and Gulfport was so big at one point that they actually stopped playing over here in Biloxi because everybody was crowding on Main Street, not necessarily doing anything wrong, but it was so many people that it eventually became a safety concern. But getting back to some of the nightlife, I will tell you this now that we all grown that I actually got into the Blue Note before I was 18, sneaking in there, not having no business being in there. But Mr. Johnson, actually a former airman, had the Blue Note. And let me just tell you, all the music you can think of, you can go in there and party. You can also eat. He had food at the counter that you can order. Down the street, we had Booker's. We had Shalimar. If you wanted you a hamburger at 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, you can go to the Kitty Cat Lounge. You can go across the ways, and actually they opened a place to compete with the Kitty Cat. Didn't last long, but the Twilight Zone was a little restaurant that opened up briefly right next to the Kitty Cat Lounge. It didn't last too long, but it also offered the same basically hamburger and hot dog experience, if you will, and a good soul food plate every now and then, depending on who was on the grill. Of course, I don't want to say last but not least, but one of the most famous places that happened on the corner of Main and Division was the Quarterback Club. The Quarterback Club was opened by a former football coach, Mr. Coach Gilliam. He was a coach at Biloxi High, well known, well loved in the community, and therefore that's where the name came from, the Quarterback Club. So they opened the Quarterback Club right there at the corner of Main and Division, and it was one of the most popular spots also in the area. So moving forward, we're saving the historic, classic stuff. What this area is still, I wouldn't want to say famous, but well known for some of the first civil rights activity in this state's history. Not the Gulf Coast, not the region, but the entire state occurred here in this area. Dr. Gilbert R. Mason Sr., of course, he started the weigh-in process in 1958. Or toward 59 when him and his family went out to the beach. And of course, he encountered, some of the angry protesters that basically ran him and his family off the beach. And that started the whole process of civil disobedience in the state. Dr. Mason eventually, him and the help of countless others who also went to the beach several times, the weigh-in participants was our cornerstone or our crown and jewel of civil rights in this community. And the weigh-in can still is still commemorated once a year in normal times. We have a great committee. They put together an annual memorial service that pays honor to the roll call participants who, if I'm not mistaken, the author of that roll call is Mr. Clement Jimersons, also AKA Bootsy. He's the author of the roll call, and I think it's up to 181 people. Dr. Mason was a well-known pediatrician, family doctor, but he was a great civil rights activist, protected by a group known as BAM. Now, some of you probably have heard of Black Angry Men, or was it Black Armed Men? Black Angry Men. So BAM was Black Angry Men. But one of the little tidbits that I just recently found out that it had a female member. Okay, even though the M stands for men in the acronym, Miss Myrtle Davis apparently was the only female member of this group of people that protected they were sort of the bodyguards of the civil rights movement back in the day. And they had a very active role in the community. I understand that Dr. Mason had a couple of locations, but his office that he ended up having up until his death is located right there on Division Street across from Henry Beck Park. And if you were a child in and around this area, chances are Dr. Mason was your doctor. Countless of my friends, he brought into the world, and we're forever thankful to have that kind of pedigree in the area of Biloxi. Although Dr. Mason had a ton of help, from people that are unsung heroes. The beautiful thing about commemorating his efforts is to see the other people involved in the weigh-in efforts for that 10-year battle. But again, I have to highlight some of the civil disobedience, if you will, the good trouble, if you will, after John Lewis. The committee that saved Nichols rides exactly on that same wave that Dr. Mason rode in. A wrong made to be right. You're fighting an entire municipality that's gung-ho on making a decision. It looks almost insurmountable that you can change the decision, but good old-fashioned good trouble and persistence and meetings led to that closure. And those efforts, like I said, was led by our cornerstone in the community, Mr. James Caldwell, who's currently serving as the actually the second president of the Biloxi NAACP after one Dr. Gilbert R. Mason. Speaking of fighting, let me be perfectly clear about the wait-in movements. The wait-in movement, again, you may read over it a little bit, and most people think it was like one event. Bunch of people got mad and went down there with a doctor to the beach, and that's what happened. No, it was a 10-year fight. It involved courts, it involved going out there, and it definitely involved bravery. And the most shocking thing is it involved teenagers. We had a memorial service June of 2020 where we actually had it on the beach. The NAACP Youth Council, they came out and practiced a couple of days. And those beautiful children got a chance to walk across the beach. Basically at 6:00 on a Sunday, on a Saturday afternoon during tourist season, the city of Biloxi authorized the street to be blocked and let those kids go across that street. And when I talk to some of them these days, some of the people that participated, their mind is blown that they got a chance to participate. Having said that, everything that we talk about as far as civil rights in the city of Biloxi and on this Gulf Coast, it ties back into the NAACP, which ties into one of our cherished buildings on Main Street, which is called affectionately the Pink Building. Some people actually call it the NAACP building. If you look at everything, every fight, every good thing in the city of Biloxi, it all sort of ties into what the NAACP has done. I was recently talking to Mr. Caldwell about participating with other groups and some of the things that they're involved in. And humble as he is, I had to remind him that no, everybody's riding y'all coattails, because you couldn't have a Black Lives Mississippi or Mississippi Rising Coalition or ADOS Mississippi had it not been for the bravery of what the NAACP did in the early 1950s, 60s, and 70s, moving up until, again, what happened with Nichols less than 20 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. But getting back to some of the eateries in Biloxi, I want to make this perfectly clear. Between the Kitty Cat Lounge in the 1980s, best cheeseburger, but worst place to clean up. That was my first job, working for Mr. Starworks Cleaning Service. I don't know if you ever tried to mop hot grease, but yeah, that was my first job on school nights, cleaning that place up. But now Miss Inez, her lounge, she had a pretty good cheeseburger. Guy named Joe. We used to call it the Joe Burger. So you had the Inez Cafe, which is where we're going to be doing a mural of the wait-in, the history of the wait-in movement. It's going to be on that building. So look forward to you all seeing that, and hopefully when you come to the corner of Main and Division, you'll see some of the history of Biloxi. The Reed House, originally located, if I'm not mistaken, on Elmer Street, was a house that was hand-built by a gentleman by the name of Pleasant Reed. Pleasant Reed was a freed, enslaved American, okay? He was actually a freed slave that came to Biloxi in the late 1800s, came here to work, ended up being very well at his craft. I mean, some of everything, mostly carpentry. Got so good that he would work with talented people as the Orr family and some of the other big names that founded East Biloxi. Some of the Slovenian names that you come to find out, the Stehanoviches and the Bahanoviches and some of the Gilliches and Gruiches. Some of the Slovenians that founded Biloxi after the colonists came through here. Mr. Reed's house is actually, the replica is actually at the Orr O'Keefe Museum. Hurricane Katrina sadly destroyed the original one. 2005, that house was actually sitting in full tack on that property at the Orr O'Keefe Museum in Biloxi. And unfortunately, Hurricane Katrina destroyed it. But I will tell you, having viewed the original house and the replica, is a big difference if you've seen both of them. But if you never went in the first one, you'd feel like you was in this house anyway originally. So the Orr O'Keefe Museum has done a great job kind of restoring that. And me personally, I think that's a story that every child, every grown person in this region should hear about. Basically, the first freed slave to come to Biloxi build his own house, have a family. And when you find out what him and his wife did as far as the work is concerned, it's going to just, give you chills about, the fact that happened in the late 1800s right here. And he was so prominent that the Biloxi Cemetery is kind of divided in two. The beachfront area is for the more prominent Caucasian people. And across the tracks is pretty much known as the pulper area, and flat out called the colored area in some places. They didn't bury him on the pulper side or the poor people side. They buried Mr. Reed on Front Beach next to Mr. Orr. That's how significant this enslaved African must have been to come down here for them to bury you on that side of the beach next to people like Mr. Orr. Pleasant Reed, again, his house located at the Orr O'Keefe Museum in Biloxi. We had Kemp's Cab at the corner of Biloxi, Main and Division in Biloxi. He was there up until 1972, but he was one of the first black taxi-owned companies in the state of Mississippi, and he was the first one in Biloxi. He also sold gas, kerosene, because most of the homes back in that day operated on kerosene. Nobody had really electricity. So he sold a lot of kerosene, and then his sons, mostly Gerald and Bubba, the two oldest boys, they worked on cars. Shorty Gines told me recently that he's a mechanic to this day because of my grandfather. He said that he used to sit at the shop and watch his dad get trained by Mr. Kemp how to work on cars, thus inspiring him to work on cars. And I think that's a beautiful little part of history that my grandfather came and opened the city's first black taxi business. And I'm trying to confirm. People have told me that he was the transportation of the movement. Anytime they used to have to move through Mississippi, they would get my grandfather's vehicles to move around in. So the recreational establishment of like the Biloxi Dodgers and the importance of recreation to the black community. Briefly, had the honor of talking to Coach Wyndham. Coach Wyndham is sort of the godfather of East Biloxi sports. So a little group, a friend of ours, we wanted to recognize him for that. And so we recently, within the last few months, got together, myself and Reverend Dickey, Brother Crawwell, James Crawwell, and some more deacons from the church. We got together with Coach Sieber, and we just got in a little room. And we let Coach Wyndham talk. And the first thing he said, it shocked me when he said it, but we kind of always knew this, but to hear him say it, he said, the reason I established East Biloxi sports was simply to dominate the west side of Biloxi. And when he said that, we all just looked at each other and then went, wow. And his thing was competition. He also said that recreation was vital to the children. Because in his words, that it was sort of like an outlet. If the kids wanted to fight, he said, we handled it between the lines. And I can personally attest to that. If Coach Wyndham was in charge of any practice that you was at, and you and somebody got into a scuffle, the first thing he did was blow a whistle real loud and long, got everybody around, and let them two people take care of it. And that was taken care of with pads, not with fists, but just hitting each other. And by that time was over, you wrap up practice and you go get a snowball or something together. Now the most significant thing, the Biloxi Dodgers. To me, they don't get enough recognition. We do honor them once a year with the Shuckers, but the Biloxi Dodgers was an all-black baseball team that basically participated throughout the Negro League. And from what I understand, we had some of the top baseball players in this hemisphere via East Biloxi sports, courtesy of one Dr. Wyndham. I mean, not Dr. Wyndham, but Mr. Wyndham and a few other very talented young men that kept East Biloxi sports together. Speaking to one of Coach Wyndham's favorite people, this person told me that they wouldn't have never won that state championship in track had it not been for the discipline of Coach Wyndham. And so my favorite memory about East Biloxi is just the community value of East Biloxi. Being proud of being from where you're from, not knowing that you're poor, even though you grow up in housing projects in East Biloxi. The Biloxi Housing Authority was a well-managed and well-oiled machine. If you lived in the projects, meant you weren't supposed to act like you lived in the projects. And that was told to you from the time you woke up to the time you went to bed, that if you leave these projects and you misrepresent where you come from, then you're going to be disciplined. In other words, we could not leave the projects, go somewhere in Biloxi and show out, because that was going to make everybody in those projects look bad. Because coming out of the projects, it was thought that because you live in the projects, you're probably presumed to act bad once you leave the project. So we had to be extra good, extra well-behaved. The way we were told is that if somebody come in the projects and they're picking on you, that's a different story. Handle your business. But if you went outside the projects, you had to basically turn your cheek, because they didn't want no problems outside of the projects. And one last thing as far as law enforcement, there were two famous policemen. We just call them Big Bill and Big Al. These were two historic law enforcement figures that basically enforced the entire community. We never saw another police car until we got older. But Big Bill and Big Al, if they saw you anywhere on Main and Division and you had no business being there, you was getting ready to be dealt with. So again, my greatest joy about East Biloxi was the community value. You were poor, but the community made you feel rich. And by the time you took a bus to the school, you had kids from off base. They couldn't wait to be able to come over to East Biloxi and be with us sometime, and we played sports. So we felt like we won the lottery. We felt like we had the advantage, even though we didn't have some of the means that they had. We felt like we had better food, better entertainment, better nightlife, better experiences than some of them had. So in closing, this was a wonderful opportunity. First of all, I really want to thank the Biloxi NAACP, led by the wonderful leadership of Mr. James Caldwell, for the opportunity to tell everybody what I do anyway. I literally tell everybody about East Biloxi when I travel. If I'm in line with you at the airport, if you're lucky enough to sit next to me on a plane, you getting ready to get East Biloxi to death. Because this, to me, is something about this little strip of land that is so unique out of all the coastal places that I've gone and been blessed to go. Right here where we're from is so unique that we're literally almost surrounded by water. We're surrounded by the best food in the world. We're surrounded by the history of music, which is still kind of there. And then we got some pretty cool people that still live here that grew up here. And now they're giving back to the community that we call East Biloxi. And also on a side note, like every other inner city in this country that went through the ups and downs of, financial crisis and setbacks, this little community is resilient as they come. And you'll hear the rest of Biloxi say that. But if Biloxi catches the cold, that means East Biloxi got the flu, because we're, our median income is the lowest. The housing is, of course, not as expensive as some other housing in the city. But one thing we got over here is each other and the history of each other. And it's coming back. I literally was laughed at in a West Biloxi barbershop about 8 years ago that within 10 years, there's going to be a business somewhere in East Biloxi where you can sit down and eat a sandwich and maybe drink a beer. And I literally was laughed at by people from East Biloxi. So we're getting closer and closer to that. We don't see any immediate evidence of it, but I got a feeling that something's going to happen within that. And I'm around to see it. And certainly we all got children that will benefit from it. And they're going to be able to tell the stories about how East Biloxi was self-sufficient and now it is self-sufficient again. So thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. God bless, and enjoy.
We hope you have enjoyed the film strip that you've just seen about the places and historical perspectives of Biloxi. And we want you to attend some of these places when you're down here. It lets you know that what we have today would not have been here had it not been for people like Dr. Mason and Dr. Don from the Gulfport branch. We have still been fighting, as was indicated in the film strip you saw a few minutes ago. We had one of our top elementary school, Nichols Elementary, the only school named for a Black in Biloxi, and was a top school in our community and a brand new school that they wanted to close. And of course, we weren't going to allow that, and we stood up for that. So the NAACP is important, and we want to let you know that the Biloxi branch of the NAACP is still fighting for the rights of people whose rights are being stepped on. We thank you, and we hope that you will come down and visit.